conditional claim at the end of the sentence or paragraph if you knew that the next logical formulation you wanted to use did not incorporate conditional relationships, right? You posit a conditional claim at the end of the previous paragraph specifically because you want to flesh out, right? You want to augment that conditional claim by the appropriation of any rule that uses conditional claims. Of the 5 rules that I'm going to discuss in this lecture series, 3 of them use conditional claims if they assume in the form if A then B. Thus, we recognize in any given paragraph, after subsequent paragraph, we can use any of those 3. Any of those 3 logical rules of inference become viable. I can use hypothetical syllogism, I can use modus tollens, I can use modus ponens. Top of page 12. So then, to synthesize the implication I left in the last section, we need to extract it, and I just erased it, but you need to extract it from the last section, which is the following, right? Quote, increased groundwater pumping to support population growth has resulted in water level declines, right? Increased groundwater pumping to support population growth has resulted in water level declines. Now, that is not in the form that it will need to be in, but gradually will transform that. Though it is a conditional claim, it doesn't sound like a conditional claim, it doesn't look like a conditional claim. But what we'll do is we'll slowly transform that concept that we extracted from the previous incorporation of modus tollens to the construction of our previous argument in order to flesh it out. That last bit was technical, but hopefully that made sense. So remember, we posited this implication there, though it was derived from our analysis using modus tollens for the purpose of expanding our analysis. This claim links the subsequent 2 rules of inference directly to hypothetical syllogism. Ponens, tollens, hypothetical syllogism. So what we need to do is create a generalized claim. How do we do that? So the next step is critically important, right? Let's look at the previous claim again. The claim is increased groundwater pumping to support population growth has resulted in water level declines. Increased groundwater pumping? What does groundwater pumping do? More groundwater pumping does what? It supports population growth. Okay, that makes sense. Results in what? It results in there being less groundwater supply. Makes sense? The assertion that something X has resulted is for our purposes too strong a claim because it applies to a specific fact in time. This is very, very important. What we are attempting to do, if you will, and the analogy that comes to mind is sort of the cultivation of precious gems. You go to the mining site and you extract this precious gem from the earth. Right? You extract this precious gem from the earth, but now you need to refine it. This process of refining it, in terms of the production of precious gems, requires sort of the use of an expenditure of tremendous amount of resources in order to cultivate it to a point which it can enter the marketplace for sale. It's exactly the same thing for ideas, right? We extract the idea of associating increased water pumping, supporting greater population growth, and decrease water levels. We extract that, but we need to refine it so that it assumes the form of a conditional claim. The first thing that we recognize in the initial sentence is that it has resulted. That's too specific a claim. That's not a general claim. That points me to a specific place, a specific time, and I need to slough off that claim. So this is the harder part. This will take time for you to be able to do this, right? But the assertion that something X has resulted is, for our purposes, too strong of a claim because it applies to a specific place and a specific time. We want to generalize if possible. Thus, we must delete the wording has resulted. You can't use that wording. It has resulted. Because it's talking about something that's too specific and I want to make a general conditional claim. And reword for the purpose of generalizing. So here's what we've rephrased it, right? Rephrased for generalization. Increased groundwater pumping to support population growth may result in water level declines. So now we have a general claim. We're not saying that it will result, but we know at least in one case that it has resulted. So we are definitely conceptually, epistemologically justified in saying that it may result, because we know as a fact that it already has resulted. So that's the idea. Now the logic. We know that our source of this citation is credible. We know that they have verified this claim. So we know that at least one situation in which this assertion is necessarily true, but we don't know that this claim is always true. Right? So we can't make the universal generalized claim that is always the case. We can say that it may be the case. Why? Because the logic is there's at least one instance in which it is the case. Again, this bit, and I'm actually glad that I found an example where I can incorporate and demonstrate this, because this is going to require a lot of practice on your part, right? You have to be able, in extracting concepts from previous arguments, recognize what phrasing in the argument makes your analysis too specific, right? Too wedded to a specific time and place, unless that's your point, unless you want to stay in that time and place. But if you're trying to make a generalized claim, you're going to have to remove those aspects of the argument that make it too specific, and this has been verified is far too specific. Thus, using the phrase may result rather than has resulted generalizes without becoming absolute. Now that we have rephrased the implication for generalization from the last section of the analysis, we can posit it as a conditional claim. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to posit this now. It's been generalized, and now that gives us the opportunity to posit it as a generalized conditional claim, which we will then use to construct our hypothetical syllogism. So what we're doing right now, conceptually, is prepping the first conditional claim, if A then B. We don't yet have the concept and the relationship between increased groundwater pumping, supporting population growth, and the decline in water levels in the proper conditional form. The first step is to generalize the original claim, and then now we'll prep this original claim so that it assumes the form of a conditional relationship. After we do that, then we can start our hypothetical syllogism, right? So there's a lot of prep. And for me, I had to go through it in this level of detail. Otherwise, I would have you assume steps that weren't explicitly stated. So all of this is prep for the first conditional claim. So remember, and I'm going to end at when I finish the next sentence on the top of page 13, because it's almost an hour. Remember, this is an intuitive approach, so each of us will formulate, based on the analysis of water conservation, completely different hypothetical syllogism. For hypothetical syllogism, me personally, I always begin by identifying B. I always want to know the role of B, because B is the most important role. And I always think about the example that I told you in terms of the domino, 3 dominoes. Because for me, that visual just works. I always think of what conditions allowed this present state to occur. Okay? If I think of it in that way, yeah, I know what conditions had to manifest in order for this condition to occur. I get that. Okay? And I also know now that it has occurred, what it can do, what it can influence. Once I make those connections, I can formalize my argument. So I can really just state everything that I said in a very simple way of, think of the conditions in terms of the 3 dominoes that needed to be satisfied in order to condition, really, to establish the condition for the possibility of B. And then once you do that, it's sort of easy then is, well, if this state exists, then here's what happens as a consequence of it. Then I have C, so then I can connect A, B, and C, right? So the hypothetical is a little bit more difficult because it's so many parts and it's so abstract. But keep that image in the back of your head and you should be fine, right? Alright. You can select groundwater pumping or water level decline as B. That's 100% okay. You can select anything that you want as B as long as you maintain the proper relationship. So all of us will have different arguments. It isn't so much what you select as the consequence. People are like, oh, well, is this the right consequence? Maybe I selected the wrong one. There really isn't any wrong one to select. Again, this is totally intuitive and you shouldn't approach this with any sort of apprehension at all. We all can write regular essays anyway, so you just think, well, does that make sense in terms of my essay? If it makes sense in terms of your essay, use it. If it feels right, use it.